We're here talking about House of the Dragon, Episode 3, Second of His Name. I'm Bendy Bono. I'm once again alone this week, hoping to get Ben back. Next week just didn't work scheduling wise, but he'll be here soon. He'll be here soon. We actually talked about it today. So, uh, another good episode tonight. But first things first, I'm smoking today a U-Boat from Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust. This is actually one of my favorite cigars out there. Unfortunately, it's a limited edition, so it's only been released twice. The third time is coming up any day now, actually. It's due out exclusive from Rocky's Cigars, and slightly different Vitola for this year's. It's going to be a Bellicoso, so I'm very excited about that. But this is just a phenomenal cigar. I didn't get the first year's release, got last year's. It's phenomenal. As is everything from Dunbarton Tobacco and Trust, as I believe I mentioned last week. All right, so we're here, episode 3, second of his name, and still really enjoying the show. I think it's going to get mixed reception because it's slow. But man, talk about a week to count your blessings when it comes to prequel fantasy series, by which I mean, if you have any qualms about this show, at least it's not Rings of Power, which was utter dog shit. You can see my other video on that for my thoughts on Rings of Power. But this, House of the Dragon, so much better in just about every way. I mean, let's be honest, season 7 and 8 of Game of Thrones are better than Rings of Power. But just one thing that stood out to me, and I promise I won't sit here ripping on Rings of Power the whole time. But one thing that stood out to me is, people are talking about, Rings of Power, whatever you think of it, at least it looks great. And I'll be the first to admit, really impressive CGI in this show. But I've seen people praising those first 2 episodes of Rings of Power for the cinematography. And, well, I agree, a lot of the visuals are impressive. A lot of the CGI is really good. Cinematography? No. If you want a good example of cinematography in a fantasy series, this episode. Now, wasn't perfect. I thought some scenes were a little bit too dark. But that said, there's some really stunning shots in this episode. One that stood out to me is the White Stag with Rhaenyra. I thought that was just a great moment. We'll talk about it a little bit more from a thematic perspective. Really liked that opening scene. Really liked the ending scene. I mean, just so much that was well shot in this episode. And to me, feels much more immersive as a world than the shiny veneer that we're getting in Rings of Power, and of course the complete incompetence of that storytelling versus the very solid, if not yet spectacular, though I think we're going to get there, storytelling of House of the Dragon. The contrast is just startling. Okay, so let's get into the episode itself. We're picking up 2 years later, so we're clipping along pretty good at in terms of the timeline here, which again, I'm expecting to continue through most of the first season. I'm not going to give anything away spoiler-wise, but I did look at the episode titles for the rest of the season, and basing that, kind of lining that up with what's in Fire and Blood. I'd say we will probably continue to clip along at jumps forward in time for probably the first half of the season. Let's say another 3 to 4 episodes before I think it slows down a little bit and settles into what the timeline's probably going to be for the last. But, it's going to be interesting to see what they do going forward with that, too, because the story in Fire and Blood actually takes a very long period of time. Long enough where you would expect there to be some actor changes if they stick with that. So I do think they're probably going to modify some of that, but without getting into any spoilers, there's some interesting things that will have to change if they do, in fact, condense that timeline. All right, so, uh, and actually, I think I'm wrong. I said 2 years later, but it's got to be more than that, doesn't it? Because uh, the 2 years is based on Aegon's turning two, Aegon the Second turning two, Aegon the Second with Aegon the First, of course, being Aegon the Conqueror, hence the title, the episode second of his name. But at the end of the last episode, Viserys and Alicent were just betrothed to get married, and so they must have gotten married, and then we have at least 9 months there, unless he got a little sneaky before the wedding night. But in any event, we're probably closer to 3 years from the last episode. So there you go. Um, I'll talk about the ending and the beginning, which involves the crab people, in a minute. The main part of this episode, though, is Viserys and Rhaenyra and the tension between those, and some really nice contrasts along the way. So it's good character work. Again, it's a slow episode, but if you've ever listened to my reviews or heard me talk on the podcast, slow doesn't mean bad. This is one of the problems that we have in modern pop culture and modern artistic uh, analysis, is that we equate slow with bad, and even maybe more to the point, we equate slow with bad pacing, and those aren't the same. They're not the same. You can have bad pacing with something that goes very, very quickly, and vice versa. You can have something that is slow burn, it's a slow development, but is actually very well paced. And I would put this show so far into that category. It is slow, but deliberately so. And, maybe part of that comes from being aided by the fact that I know where it's going. If you don't, which I'm guessing a lot of you haven't read Fire and Blood, maybe you feel differently about it. But the highlight in this episode for me, at least from a character perspective, is I've been comparing, and a lot of people have, Viserys to Ned Stark from the first series, and that Ned is completely outmatched with his circumstances, and so is Viserys here. Good man, bad king. We mentioned that several times. But I actually think it's a little bit more than that. In this episode, it came out that Viserys is just kind of dumb. I mean, Ned Stark wasn't dumb. Like, the interesting thing about Ned Stark's character is he's not dumb. He's just wrong for the circumstance that he finds himself in. It's like if a star NFL lineman tries to go and play basketball. I don't know. Maybe there's some who'd be great at it, but it's like the wrong fit. It's just the wrong fit. That was the issue with Ned. But Viserys is just kind of an idiot. He's still a good man, I guess. He's not. He's certainly, as far as Game of Thrones characters go, we've seen a lot of bad people. He doesn't seem like a bad person, but he's not very smart. We're getting strong, can't everyone just get along vibes with him, and of course the answer to that is no. Everybody can't just get along. We're not gonna have a show if everybody can just get along, and he just kind of doesn't get it. And of course he has other people like Otto Hightower pulling the strings behind him. But I really like the contrast between him and Rhaenyra in this episode. In that Rhaenyra, and they're obviously at odds, and if you watch the preview for next week, that's going to continue. But even more so than that, I thought it came out really well thematically in their mutual hunts. If you can even call Viserys that, it's like the scene where he kills that stag. Reminded me of one of my favorite quotes from The Office, where it's the episode where Michael Scott has to fire somebody and he's awful at it. And they do the cutaway to the interview, and he says, "Yeah, I did go hunting once. I shot a deer in the leg, had to kill it with a shovel. Took about an hour." Yes, that was exactly Viserys' hunting style. Just pathetic, he's got the stupid stag tied up, and he can't even manage to do that. Then you contrast that to Rhaenyra, and the boar attacks her. And at first I'm thinking, not another boar, because if you recall the last time we had a boar on the Game of Thrones show, it did Robert in. At least that's how it is in the books. I can't recall. I haven't watched season one in a long time, so I can't recall if they retconned it or did something different. But I think it's a boar in the series too. So, unlike her father, um, she just goes ape shit on this board, and it's fantastic. And I just love how she's kind of smeared with blood for the entire rest of the episode. And man, then that I sure love that scene with her and the white stag. Like, there's this regalness to it, and there's her as this warrior, and it's like, by the way, um, again, I know I said I'm not going to rip on Rings of Power the whole time, but Rings of Power is like they're so desperate to make Galadriel this badass female character, but they're just trying to assert it, which falls completely flat. This is how you do that, okay? You don't assert it and then call everybody who isn't convinced a misogynist or sexist or whatever, which seems to be the Rings of Power strategy. You show it. You invest us in the character. You show the desperation. Like, Rhaenyra is a badass character, not a badass female character. She's a badass character in the same way that Sarah Connor was not a badass female character, and Ellen Ripley was not a badass female character. They're just great characters. And Rhaenyra, I'm not going to put her on the level of those two yet, but this episode shows her on her way to that. Like, the way she responds to that boar, it's this desperation, and that's where the character comes out of. It's not the Galadriel thing, and I won't spoil it in case you haven't watched Rings of Power yet. But there's moments in those first two episodes that are so stupid. Again, see my video from yesterday on that, and it's like they're just trying to assert something. They're just trying to assume that she's this great character, and she's not. It's like the contrast between these two shows with how they're handling their strong female characters could not be more different. All right, let's relight this. I'm talking, which is what I should be doing, and my smoke's going out. So, along the way, of course, we do get our first Lannister sighting, and I don't know, the whole thing, this is one element of the episode that maybe fell a little bit flat for me. I mean, first of all, Jason Lannister, if we weren't told he was a Lannister, he doesn't really fit the mold that we got from Game of Thrones, which is okay, I guess. I mean, it's several, generations previous, so, maybe things change. But, like, one of the things I liked is, in the original series, is Tywin Lannister. He's this proud guy. He's proud because of the legacy of his house. And does Jason Lannister fit that legacy? Not from what we saw tonight. This guy is just sort of an idiot, and his courting of Rhaenyra was very awkward. I get that it's a whole setup thing. I get that he's just there to play a role, but I don't know. It felt like we wanted to have a Lannister character show up at some point, and not terribly well thought out, I think. So that part of the episode fell a little bit flat for me. What I did like later on then is, just when I'm ready to write the series off as a complete loss, I did like his drunk scene where he just starts getting pissed off at everybody. Like, okay, this is what we need to see here, not the smiling everybody. I mean, I love Paddy Constantine's, however you say his last name, his little fake forced smile that he keeps giving to everybody. It's like there's this desperation behind the character, and then when he gets blasted on the wine, this other side of him comes out. It's like, oh, here's the guy who could actually be a halfway decent king if he tried. And it was fantastic. So I liked that scene. I liked Angry Viserys. I liked him just kind of going off on people in that moment. All right, so lots of good stuff there in terms of the character work, and then we get the stepstone scenes both at the beginning and the end with Damon. And man, I know I said this the last couple of weeks, but I'll probably keep saying it. Matt Smith just killing it in this series. Like every scene he's in, he's so good. And then I love that moment where he gets the letter that help is coming, and he doesn't want it. Like I don't, he starts beating the messenger with his helmet, which is so brutal, but so in character with who we know this guy is already. And I guess you can quibble with that final fight scene. Is it realistic that he goes out there and it's successful and everything? I not really, but it worked. And that's the thing. Like if you're gonna film something that isn't convincing from the perspective of verisimilitude, at least make it work thematically with what you're doing, and it did. So crab people are no more, which is a shame. I thought they were nice. I thought they were nice, villains there. I mean, they weren't terribly well developed, of course. They just sort of served a role, but I mean, pirate type people who live in caves and feed their enemies to crabs. That's a nice Game of Thrones type of villain. So I like that. Um, oh, you're right. Yeah, Damon does lose an eye in Fire and Blood. I forgot about that, but yeah, that would have been the moment to have him do it, especially when all those rain of arrows are coming in. So if they keep that, um, yeah, that would have been a good moment to put it in. I wouldn't be surprised though if they nix that element from the book because it just might not work visually, but we'll see. We'll see if they get there. So, really liked where this ended up. I won't give away too much from the preview for next week, which I did watch. I will say one thing that stood out to me is that they're bringing back the whole prophecy of the prince who was promised the Song of Ice and Fire, which I didn't mention in the very first video for episode 1, but that fell completely flat for me in the pilot. So I'm on board with this show. I'm really on board with this show. Not sure I love that element of it. Not sure how I feel about that coming back. I was hoping it was just going to be like a one. I know this wasn't realistic hope, but maybe it was just going to be a one-time thing to lure in all the old Game of Thrones fans and show a connection. But it feels very Marvel-esque in that we need to reference other things. We can't just have this be a story that stands on its own. We have to reference other things because people like it when they hear things that they know. I guess. I don't know. I'm going to give them a chance to prove me wrong, but at this moment, if there's an Achilles heel to this show, it seems like it's going to be trying to shoehorn in references to Game of Thrones. So let's see, $5 says Princess Rhaenyra goes north. We see some White Walkers. Yeah, you're probably right. Which, again, I'll give it a chance if that happens. But boy, is that going to be awkward. And I feel like that's a tough one to pull off. It's not in the source material. There's no reference to that. Doesn't mean, they're going to expand all sorts of things from the source material because it's not a novel and a series of novels in the way the Game of Thrones source material was. But gosh, just let this show be its own thing. It's strong. You got good characters. Let it run. That's what I'm in favor of, but I will give it a chance. I will go into next week and beyond with an open mind. But we'll see. All right, guys. I think that's all I've got for this. Another strong episode. If you're bothered by it being slow, maybe try to watch something that's not Marvel, and you might enjoy it a little bit more. Then just let it develop. Let it develop. Remember how sucky season 7 and 8 were when they were just going at a million miles an hour? This isn't that. Maybe you can make an argument it's too far on the other extreme. But let's let this show develop. It's doing good things. and it's not Rings of Power. So excited about that. Speaking of Rings of Power, one last reference. I have a follow up video that I think I'm going to do tomorrow, where I'm going to give you some stupid predictions for this show because the show is remarkably dumb so far. So I've thought of some of the dumbest things that they will probably shoehorn in, and I'm going to give that to you tomorrow. And so, for whatever reason, I hate Rings of Power so far, but I'm really enjoying hating it. So we'll keep the fun going. But really enjoying House of the Dragon. That's what we're here about for tonight. And so glad that we at least have one great fantasy prequel series. All right, guys. Bendy Bono, Sci-Fi Christian. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week.